I think my message to small business owners is very much that Conservatives are on your side. I started my own business at the bottom of the last recession in the summer of 1991, and I really remember the struggle, but also the sense of reward from being able to get that business from nothing, get it to grow, and then actually get it to prosper. So we're very much on the side of small businesses because we've been there, we've done it, we understand the problem. The current government has lots of good intentions. The problem is it keeps changing the way in which the tax system works, regulation works. If you're trying to run a business, what you need is clarity and certainty. My view has always been the government's there to create the right framework for business, and then not to tinker and meddle and keep changing the tax system, keep changing the regulations. If you do that, as Labour have, you make it really difficult for businesses to plan. What we want to do as Conservatives is to set out the long-term framework and then have the discipline to leave businesses do what they do best, which is to create wealth, create the jobs. Number one, I want to make sure that instead of having to apply and fill in forms for small business rate relief, we scrap the forms and make it automatic. Half of those who are eligible don't get the money, and it's worth up to 1,200 quid for every small business per annum. So that's an immediate, simple saving, and it's a saving to people's bottom line. The second thing we want to do is to have what I call a one-in, one-out line. Very simple. If you run a small business, the problem is that it's not the single regulation that affects you, it's the cumulative burden. You have to be a health and safety expert, you have to be able to deal in personnel, all sorts of other things. We're going to make governments realise and government departments realise that if you look at the cumulative burden of regulation, that's what they'll have to deal with. So our rule will be very simple. If a department wishes to bring forward a new regulation, they'll have to show how they're going to actually reduce the total cost of regulation to the business before they can do that. And you mentioned three, let me touch on the third. We also want to tackle the regulators themselves. Under Labour, they've mushroomed in numbers, they've got too big for their boots. So we're going to review every single one of the 150 regulators, and we want to end up with fewer regulators, we want the organisations to be smaller, and we want to make sure they're cheaper to comply with. So in other words, we want to approach this as a system rather than just dealing with the symptoms of the problem. We intend to get rid of the regional business links, the contracts that are there, so that we can use the money that we've got to turn the service from being led by the people who provide it to making it into a customer-led service. If you run a business, you're focused on what your customers need. But unfortunately at the moment, the current system under Labour is not really about what businesses want, it's what ministers think they should have. So we'll change it in two very simple ways. First, all the information that you need that's essential from government will be online. It'll be on your computer, it'll be on your mobile phone. Secondly, the advice will be face-to-face, it will be quality, and it will also be focused on your needs. So, for example, the serial entrepreneur who runs a high-tech business, we want to have a tailored service like they have in London, which is the one the British Library use, the Business and IP Centre, very much focused on their needs. But if you're running a corner shop in Birmingham, for example, then that's a different animal. You want something that's local, face-to-face, and deals with the problems you've got. So we want to grow the number of local enterprise agencies that provide direct support, and we think that'll be a much more practical way of providing a service that people actually need. I think there is a problem with lending, but there's also a problem with borrowing, in that a lot of businesses at the moment are cautious, they're worried about the next 6 months, 8 months, and therefore they're holding back on lending. So applications for borrowing are low. But it's also true that the banks are not being wholly cooperative in the way in which they charge or suddenly change the conditions for loans that people are seeking. So I want to keep a very firm grip on that agenda. I want to make sure that the terms are fair and that they are open, so we don't get undue and unreasonable pressures on small businesses with suddenly changing terms and conditions. In terms of EFG, the Enterprise Finance Guarantee, I think it's taken a long time to bed down. I mean, the government changed the arrangements from the old small firms loan guarantee. I don't quite know why they tinkered and meddled with that, but we've now got the Enterprise Finance Guarantee. My instinct will be, as I said to you earlier, not to tinker, but if it's working broadly, as most small businesses say to me it is, then let's just look at whether we can make minor improvements, but leave it in principle, unless we actually need to change it. So our view with the EFG is, if it's working, then let's leave it alone. If there's a problem with it, then let's address it. Let's do it fundamentally and not change it this month and then again in the autumn and then again next year. Businesses don't want that. They want clarity and they want consistency. Let's make it easier to start up, for example. So let's move towards a one-click online registration. Let's have Britain to be the first country in which we have 100 megabyte superfast broadband. So the businesses are online and they're in touch. Let's help those startup businesses employ someone. So we will make sure that under a Conservative government, the first 10 employees, there's no employer national insurance to pay. So no forms to fill in for the employer, no tax on the national insurance to pay in the first 2 years of a Conservative government for the first 10 employees. I think those are very good, simple things that make a business's life easier so they can get on and do what they're good at, which is to create wealth and then create jobs. There are a lot of other things we want to do as well around simplifying the tax system so we can then cut the tax rates, reduce red tape, and as we've discussed, get rid of regulators. But I think also just have the sense to listen to the business community and to make occasional changes where they're essential, but then to let business do what it does, which is to grow. I think there's a temptation as a politician to keep interfering and meddling. And politicians are not the best people to run your business. Your viewers are the best people to run their business. It's their enterprise. My job is to create the best environment for them and then let them get on with it. I think there is a problem in the statistics, if you look, that there seems to be a far smaller proportion of those in the black and ethnic minorities are participating as entrepreneurs. And we need to look at how we can remove some of the barriers. And that's why I think David Cameron was absolutely right to say, let's see how we can broaden the network of mentors so that we can get that support for that particular group. When I ran my business, I was a mentor for the Princess Youth Business Trust. And that was a very good example where someone who's got a little bit of experience is able to help someone else get going. And I think that's a really good model. So I like mentoring, and I think this could be very good for that community. We want to look at how we support it, by which I mean probably not try and run it. There's lots of really good mentoring systems out there, and what I'd like to do is to nurture those to grow rather than wade in and try and run them from Whitehall. Because if you're a mentor, you want to give something back. If there's a clipboard and an inspector standing over your shoulder trying to tell you how to do it, you're far less likely to want to give that time. And most mentors I talk to are delighted to be able to help someone make progress in their life. They're happy to do that. I think the trick we've got to do is to encourage more people to come into it, make sure the standards are good, and make sure they're accessible for those mentees who are looking for help.